Hey kids, let's talk about the good old days growing up in Idaho. Hello everyone, welcome to Stories About the Good Old Days. But you know, some of those stories from the good old days weren't so good. Some were sad, and some raise intriguing questions about forgotten times. But all good stories get retold whether they make us happy or sad. It's part of our heritage to accept history as it was and then move on. This story is real, as written in the personal history of Harry Hicks, in his own words. It takes place when he was a young 12 or 13-year-old boy, around 1930, growing up in Salmon, Idaho. He will note that he was sick much of his youth, as were many of the other kids in Salmon at that time. Here's his story. I was sick much of my youth, but I must have been well once in a while, because I distinctly remember fun times I had playing with my friends in my caster wagon. And I can remember I had roller skates made out of a box, nailed onto a 2x4 with wheels on the bottom, and two handles nailed on top that I used to ride like a scooter. I remember Claude Coyle, our music teacher, and I remember taking a basketball away from Bob Aldous and having a wooden sword fight with another kid. And I remember Florence Behrman because she walked to school with me and was nice and friendly to me. I never remember attending school much, but I do remember being so sick. Around that time, I was often farmed out for the summer, as we called it. That's where you go visit an aunt or uncle or cousin and work for them. I was farmed out to George Bennett, Aunt Hattie, and Cousin Gladys, where I grew to know life as an older young man. I spent many summers riding and working and thinking I was a man. One day, we went up to a wild horse roundup. We all rode for the U.S. Forest Service and rounded up about 300 head of beautiful ponies, the most beautiful I ever saw. I found out later this was the third roundup of its kind in 3 years. The ponies were mostly young pintos, buckskins, and Appaloosa. I figured they were going to be driven in for a sale. In fact, they sold a few for $3 each, but that's all. Nobody had any money because of the Depression. So they were driven up a blind wash and shot, all of them. I stood and watched, then went off and cried into the mane of my horse till long after the last bullet was fired. And then I rode away. I found out the Forest Service wanted that range for cows. I have yet to see a cow or even an elk feed in those mountains, where came 300 of the slickest, prettiest ponies I ever saw. All that range is deserted and desert now. It's things like this and lies like this that make it a disgrace to be a white man. I hope I sit in judgment on those people someday. I'm sure I'll never forget. Along about that time, working up in Chalice, I was one more time to feel the worry and fear of sickness, for I swelled up with Bright's disease and dropsy. My blood and urine mixed, and even my privates swelled up and became distorted. My eyes swelled up, and up to about the level of my heart, I became puffy and kind of glazed all over from the water buildup in my body. My mother came up to get me, and I felt everything would be all right, and I was so relieved I could sleep. When I woke up, I was back in Salmon and not in Chalice, but I had to sleep propped up in bed because of my heart splashing in the water every time it would beat. Mama put me in the back room and told me to be quiet. The doctor was coming with the undertaker. Crying, she told me they were going to take me away. When they came, they said, "Clyda, we came for that dead boy. It's against the law not to bury a body when they die." I immediately raised up in bed and yelled, "You get out of here, you sons of bitches! You've made your last mistake." Not long after they left, I was lying in bed talking to the angel of death. I had seen him standing at the foot of my bed, waiting, but up until this time, I was afraid to talk to him. I remember him very well, and he answered me, and he said he would leave me to live for now, But I mustn't forget him, for he would be after me when I became an old man. Fortunately, I've never seen him again, but I will know him when I do. An old Indian woman appeared at our door and sang over and over, "I can fix the boy, I can fix the boy." I think of how much nerve it took for my mother to reject a doctor who was treating kids all over town. And by the way, they all died. This was an epidemic in Salmon with many of the kids, which nearly wiped out all the children that were about my age. There being no newcomers, it really showed as we got older. There was only Scott Butterfield, Thomas Brown, and me, Harry Hicks, to name a few. And the boy from the ranch, Charlie Walkley. We were all nearly full grown when we graduated from the 8th grade. Made us all about 2 years behind in school. Anyway, I can never praise my mother enough for the spunk it took and the nerve to turn the doctor from our door and tell him an Indian woman was going to be my doctor. He cursed my mother and told her she was just inviting death, and I would surely die. And I said, "You've had your last chance." Well, the Indian woman sent my mother out to get some slippery elm bark. The Indian woman put that on heat for a strong tea. After preparations were made, she took me down by the river where there was plenty of wash boulders. She had a fire burning with plenty of those big rocks heating. In a teepee, there was a cot set up with a tub of water sitting underneath. The Indian woman, chanting all the time, gave me a cupful of slippery elm bark tea that was so slimy I could not quit drinking once I started. The slime just slipped down my throat. She threw a horse blanket over me, then she began to throw hot rocks in a tub, and took the cold ones out by means of a giant pair of pincers made from willows. If I was ever to think I was in hell, I was to think so now. But I was a good boy and had the knowledge I was to be made well. I lay, and the sweat poured out of me. I reveled in every drop, because I felt better all the time, and I kept drinking my slippery elm bark tea every so often. Along about midnight of the first day, the swelling went down, and I began to pee after not being able to do so for over a week. I began passing dirty-looking old brown pee. The ordeal kept up for 24 hours until I was down to normal, with just a little puffiness around my eyes. Later, I sat on the sidewalk in front of my house, taking in the sun. In time, the doctor drove past, and I thumbed my nose at him, but he didn't recognize me. I wrote these happenings of my illness because those doctors would not believe them. Harry Hicks, about 1930. Wow, what a great story. You know, some of the smartest people are those you least expect, like that Indian woman who had knowledge of healing and was willing to help out. There's no question I and all my family that came after my Grandpa Harry owe a great deal of gratitude to that old Indian woman who saved Grandpa's life. Someday, I hope to meet that woman and give her a big hug, maybe in the afterlife. So, how many people have made a difference in your life? Think about it, and try to thank those people if you can. Thanks for listening. Growing up in Idaho, the good old days.